At the family dinner, my daughter-in-law told me, "We're not inviting you to any more events." I ate in silence. But when I removed them all from my will, they came begging for forgiveness. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I gripped, my fork tighter, focusing on the perfectly roasted potatoes on my plate rather than Catherine's cold smile across the table. My son David studied his wine glass, refusing to meet my eyes. "It's not personal, Martha," Catherine continued, her voice carrying that artificial sweetness that never reached her eyes. "It's just that our social circle has certain expectations, and frankly, your presence makes things awkward." Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. I felt the familiar ache spreading through my chest. At 68, I'd grown accustomed to disappointment, but this cut deeper than anything I'd felt since losing Richard 7 years ago. "Mom?" David finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You understand, right? It's just better this way." "Better for whom?" I wanted to ask. Instead, I nodded and took another bite of food I could no longer taste. Outside, rain tapped against the dining room windows of the house I'd helped them buy with the money from selling my wedding rings. This beautiful home with its gleaming hardwood floors and crystal chandelier, the down payment had been my gift to them 5 years ago. An investment in our family, I'd called it then. What a fool I'd been. "It's nothing against you personally," Catherine added, serving herself more wine, "but Emily's sweet 16 is coming up, and it needs to be perfect. The Morgans will be there, and the Prestons. You know how these things are." I didn't know, actually. I'd never cared about impressing people with names like that. I'd been too busy working double shifts at the hospital to put David through college, after his father died. Too focused on making sure my son never felt the absence of his father to worry about social climbing. "Of course," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. "I understand." "I knew you would," Catherine smiled, triumphant. "You always were reasonable, Martha." Reasonable. Yes, that was me. Reasonable Martha, who never complained when David missed our weekly lunches because Catherine had suddenly planned something more important. Reasonable Martha, who babysat the grandchildren on short notice but was somehow never free when I suggested taking them to the park. Reasonable Martha, who had slowly, systematically been erased from her own family. I looked at my son, the little boy I'd raised alone, the teenager I'd stayed up with during his nightmares, the young man whose hand I'd held through every disappointment and celebrated every triumph. Now he couldn't even look me in the eye. "Is there dessert?" Emily, my 15-year-old granddaughter, broke the silence, already scrolling through her phone. "Grandma usually brings those lemon cookies." "I didn't know I'd be needed for dessert," I said quietly. Catherine's smile tightened. "We have ice cream in the freezer, honey." I watched as David visibly relaxed, crisis apparently averted. How had we gotten here? When had my presence become something to be tolerated rather than welcomed? Later, as I gathered my coat to leave, David awkwardly patted my shoulder. "You'll be okay, right, Mom? It's not like we won't see you at all. Just not at the bigger events." Looked at my son, really looked at him, and for a moment saw the frightened 8-year-old boy who'd crawled into my bed the night after we buried his father. I'd held him then, promising that we would always have each other. Always. "I'll be fine, David," I said, and meant it, though not in the way he imagined. I've always been fine. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and memories. I thought about the manila envelope in my desk drawer, the will I'd made after Richard died, leaving everything to David and the grandchildren. My modest house, my savings, the antique jewelry collection Richard had given me piece by piece over our 30-year marriage, all of it designated for the family that had just informed me I wasn't good enough to attend a teenage birthday party. My house was dark when I arrived, no one waiting to ask how dinner had gone. My Siamese cat, Bella, wound around my ankles as I hung up my coat, her purr the only welcome I'd received tonight. I made tea with mechanical movements, my mind replaying the evening like a film reel I couldn't stop. Catherine's dismissive smile. David's averted eyes, the ease with which they had discarded me. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. It was an old thing, a wedding gift from Richard's mother, who had survived her own heartbreaks with a dignity I'd always admired. "Never let them see you break," she'd told me once. "That's the secret." Settling at my small kitchen table, I opened my laptop, a Christmas gift from David 3 years ago, before Catherine had fully implemented what I now recognized as my systematic removal from their lives. My hands trembled slightly as I typed an email to James Hoffman, my attorney and the son of my oldest friend. Dear James, I need to make changes to my will. When would you be available to meet? Martha Sullivan. I pressed send before I could second-guess myself. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10 times. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean. Inside, something had shifted. A decision made not in anger but in quiet revelation. They had shown me who they were. Now I would show them who I had become. I went to bed that night with an unexpected sense of lightness. For years, I'd been clinging to a family that had already let me go. Tomorrow would be the first day I stopped reaching for ghosts. I didn't know then that in less than 3 months, that same dining room would host a very different conversation. One where tears would be shed, truths revealed, and the word forgiveness would hang in the air between us like a lifeline none of us knew how to grasp. But that night, as I drifted to sleep with Bella curled against my side, I simply felt free. The strange, terrifying freedom that comes when you finally stop trying to be loved by people who have forgotten how. The morning after that disastrous dinner, I woke with swollen eyes and a resolve that felt like armor. James had already responded to my email. He could see me Thursday afternoon. 3 days to decide exactly how to proceed. I made coffee stronger than usual and carried it to my small home office. The room had once been David's bedroom. Now it held my desk, bookshelves, and boxes of family photographs I'd been meaning to organize for years. Today seemed as good a time as any to start. The first album I pulled out was navy blue, its cover faded. Inside were photos from David's childhood, his 5th birthday party with the superhero cake I'd stayed up all night to decorate, his 8th grade graduation where he'd received the math award, his high school football games that I'd never missed, even when it meant trading shifts at the hospital. We were happy, weren't we, David? I whispered to the smiling boy in the photographs. The boy who used to climb into my lap with books, who called me his mommy hero after his father died. When had that changed? I tried to pinpoint the exact moment. Was it when he met Catherine in his senior year of college? Or later, when her family connections helped him secure that first job at her father's investment firm? Perhaps it was more gradual. Catherine, subtly reshaping him into someone who belonged in her world, not mine. I set the album aside and opened my desk drawer, pulling out a manila folder labeled Financial. Inside were bank statements, property deeds, and insurance policies, the paper trail of a life carefully managed. After Richard died, I'd taught myself about investments, determined not to become the helpless widow everyone expected. What had started as a necessity became something I was good at, growing our modest savings into something substantial. David didn't know, neither did Catherine. They assumed I lived on my nurse's pension and Richard's small life insurance payout. They had no idea about the investment portfolio that had tripled in value over the past decade, or the beachfront property in North Carolina that Richard and I had purchased as an anniversary gift to ourselves the year before his heart attack. Property alone was worth over $800,000 now. Waterfront real estate had skyrocketed. Combined with my other assets, I was worth well over $1.2 million. Not a fortune by Catherine's standards, perhaps, but certainly more than the modest inheritance they were probably expecting. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The screen showed David's name. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Mom? His voice sounded tentative. I just wanted to check that you got home okay last night. I've been driving myself home for 50 years, David, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I know, but with the rain. He trailed off. Anyway, Catherine wanted me to make sure you understood about the party. It's not that we don't want you there, but you don't want me there. I finished for him. Mom, that's not fair. It's complicated. Actually, it's quite simple. I surprised myself with how calm I sounded. You and Catherine have made a decision, and I'm respecting it. A pause. You're not upset? Was he hoping for tears? For me to beg to be included? I'm fine, David. I need to go now. I have plans today. Another pause. Plans? With who? The question stung more than it should have. Was it so unimaginable that I had a life outside of waiting for his rare calls? Friends, I said simply, though my calendar was empty. Give my love to the children. I hung up before he could respond and sat there, staring at the phone. For years, I'd centered my life around their schedule. keeping Sundays open for family dinners they frequently canceled, saving holidays even when they chose to spend them with Catherine's family instead. Always available, always waiting, always understanding. Not anymore. I spent the rest of the morning sorting through photographs and documents, creating neat piles, things to keep, things to donate, things to throw away. By noon, I had filled 2 garbage bags with old magazines and papers I'd been holding onto for no reason. The doorbell rang just as I was making lunch. Through the peephole, I saw my neighbor, Nancy Wilson, holding a ceramic dish. I made too much. "Lasagna," she announced when I opened the door. At 73, Nancy was a widow like me, though she'd lost her husband more recently. "Thought you might like some." "That's very kind," I said, surprised. Nancy and I had always been friendly, but not close. Nonsense. Neighbors should look out for each other. She peered at me more closely. "You okay, Martha? You look like you've been going through it." Something about her direct gaze made my carefully constructed composure waver. "Family dinner last night," I managed. "Not the best." Nancy nodded knowingly. "Why don't you come in for a minute? I've got fresh coffee." I hesitated, then grabbed my keys. Why not? My own coffee had gone cold, and my empty house suddenly felt too quiet. Nancy's kitchen was warm and cluttered in a comfortable way. Photos of her grandchildren covered the refrigerator, not unlike mine, but interspersed with postcards from Paris, Rome, Bangkok. "You travel," I observed as she poured coffee into mismatched mugs. "Started after Gerald died," she said matter-of-factly. "Always wanted to, but he was a homebody, so now I go everywhere." She handed me a mug. "What happened at dinner?" I hadn't planned to tell anyone, but the words tumbled out. Catherine's announcement, David's silence, my quiet drive home. Nancy listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from surprise to indignation. When I finished, she set down her mug with a decisive thunk. "Well, that's a load of crap," she declared. "No offense to your son, but he needs a backbone transplant." The unexpected comment startled a laugh out of me, the first genuine laugh I'd had in days. "You're not wrong," I admitted. "So what are you going to do?" she asked. I thought about the appointment with James, the neat piles in my office, the decades I'd spent putting my family first. "I'm making changes," I said simply. Nancy nodded approvingly. "Good. Start with yourself, and the rest follows." She stood and rummaged in a drawer, pulling out a brightly colored flyer. "Community Center's starting a new book club. First meetings, Friday. You should come." I took the flyer automatically. "I don't know. What else are you doing Friday? Waiting by the phone for your son to call?" Her tone was gentle despite the blunt words. She was right. What was I doing with my time except waiting for crumbs of attention from people who had made it clear I wasn't a priority? "I'll be there," I said, surprising myself. Walking home, I felt something unexpected. A small flutter of anticipation. For the first time in years, I was making plans that had nothing to do with my family's schedule or needs. It felt foreign. It felt freeing. Back home, I returned to my sorting with renewed purpose. In the back of my closet, I found a box I hadn't opened since Richard died, his personal items. Inside were his watches, cufflinks, the fountain pen he'd used to write me love notes even after 30 years of marriage. At the bottom was an envelope addressed to me in his handwriting. I remembered opening it after the funeral, a love letter. He'd written to be read after he was gone. I'd been too raw then to absorb his words fully. Now, I read it again with clearer eyes. "My dearest Martha, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're facing life without me. I know you're stronger than you believe. You always were the backbone of our family, even when you let me think I was. Live fully, my love. Don't shrink your life to accommodate others. You gave our son roots. Now give yourself wings. All my love, always. Richard." I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling closer to him than I had in years. He'd known, even then, how I would pour myself into David, perhaps at the expense of my own life. "I hear you, Richard," I whispered. "I'm finally listening." Thursday couldn't come soon enough. I had decisions to make, a life to reclaim, and for the first time in 7 years, I felt my late husband's approval like a warm hand on my shoulder, guiding me forward. James Hoffman's law office occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian house downtown. I'd known James since he was a boy with skinned knees playing in my backyard with David. Now he was a respected attorney with silver temples and reading glasses that made him look like his father. Martha, he greeted me warmly, rising from behind his desk. It's been too long. Life gets busy, I said, accepting his handshake. Though in truth, it wasn't busyness that had kept me away. It was Catherine's thinly veiled disapproval of my inappropriate friendship with a family that didn't match her social aspirations. James gestured to a chair. Your email mentioned changes to your will. What did you have in mind? I took a deep breath. I want to remove David and his family as beneficiaries. If James was surprised, he hit it well. I see. And who would you like to name instead? I've been researching the Hope Harbor Women's Center. They provide housing and education for single mothers. I'd like everything to go to them. James nodded, making notes. That's certainly doable. May I ask what prompted this change? I hesitated. James and his wife still exchanged Christmas cards with David. Let's just say I've been reevaluating my priorities. Fair enough. He leaned back in his chair. Before we proceed, I should remind you of your current assets for distribution. As James listed my holdings, the house, investments, the beach property, insurance policies, I watched his expression carefully. Did David know the full extent of my estate? Had he discussed it with James? Has anyone inquired about my will recently? I asked when he finished. James paused, his pen hovering over his legal pad. Catherine called the office last month. She mentioned concerns about your aging memory and wanted to discuss power of attorney options. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. My memory is perfectly fine. That's what I told her, James said mildly. I also reminded her that you're my client, not her, and any discussions about your estate would need to include you. What did she say to that? She said I should expect your call soon, that you and she had discussed streamlining your affairs. His eyes met mine. I take it that conversation never happened? No, I said quietly. It didn't. James set down his pen. Martha, is everything all right with you and David's family? The concern in his voice nearly undid me. How long had it been since someone had actually asked about my well-being? Not my availability to babysit or help with household projects, but me? No, I admitted. It's not. I told him about the dinner, Catherine's announcement, David's silence. With each word, the hurt I'd been containing spilled out, filling the quiet office. James listened without interrupting. When I finished, he removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. I'm so sorry, Martha. That's inexcusable. It's been coming for a long time, I said. I just didn't want to see it. And now you want to change your will? It wasn't a question. Yes. My voice was steadier than I expected. I've spent my life taking care of David. I've supported his choices, even when they hurt me. I've stepped back when Catherine made it clear I wasn't welcome. I've been patient, understanding, and endlessly available, and none of it has mattered. James nodded slowly. I understand. But are you sure this is what you want? Cutting them out completely is a significant step. I'm not doing this out of spite, I said. I'm doing it because I've finally realized that I've been holding on to a relationship that doesn't exist anymore. David has made his choice. Now I'm making mine. All right, James said finally. I'll draw up the new will. It should be ready for your signature early next week. As I stood to leave, James added, For what it's worth, Martha, I think Richard would be proud of you right now. Thank you, James. My voice caught. I think he would too. Outside, the October air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. I decided to walk home, needing time to process the morning's events. 3 blocks from James's office, I passed a small art gallery with a sign in the window. Community art classes, all ages welcome. On impulse, I pushed open the door. A bell jingled, announcing my arrival. The space was bright and airy, with paintings covering every wall. At the back, a woman with silver-streaked hair looked up from a canvas. Hello there, she called. Just browsing or interested in classes? Classes, actually, I said, surprising myself. Do you have anything for complete beginners? The woman, Helen, according to her paint-splattered apron, smiled warmly. Absolutely. We have a new session starting. Tuesday evenings, watercolor basics. Perfect. I'd never painted a day in my life. Richard had been the artistic one, always sketching landscapes during our vacations. I'd always watched, never participating. I'm Martha, I said, extending my hand. Welcome to the gallery, Martha, Helen replied. Something tells me you're going to enjoy this journey. By Friday evening, I had signed up for art classes, attended my first book club meeting at the community center, where Nancy introduced me to her entire social circle, and completely reorganized my home office. The only call I received from David was a brief message asking if I could watch the kids next Saturday while he and Catherine attended a fundraiser. I didn't call back. Saturday morning, I drove to the beach property Richard and I had purchased 15 years ago. We'd planned to retire there someday, spending our golden years watching sunsets over the Atlantic. After his death, I couldn't bear to visit, letting a management company handle the occasional rentals. The small cottage was exactly as I remembered. Weathered gray shingles, blue shutters, wraparound porch facing the ocean. Inside, everything was preserved like a time capsule. The shell collection we'd gathered during our last vacation, Richard's fishing hat still hanging by the door, the patchwork quilt my mother had made for our 10th anniversary spread across the master bed. I opened all the windows, letting the sea breeze sweep through rooms that had been closed too long. Then I sat on the porch swing, watching waves crash against the shore while seagulls wheeled overhead. I miss you, I said aloud, imagining Richard beside me. But I think I'm finally ready to live again. That night, back home, I found a message from Catherine on my answering machine. Her voice was tighter than usual. Martha, since you haven't returned David's call about watching the children, I've had to hire a sitter for the fundraiser. It would have been nice to have some notice about your unavailability. Also, Emily's birthday party is in 3 weeks. While the main event is, as we discussed, not appropriate for you to attend, we thought you might want to stop by the house the day before to drop off your gift. Let me know. I deleted the message without calling back. 3 weeks ago, I would have rearranged any plans to accommodate their schedule. I would have swallowed the hurt of being excluded from my own granddaughter's birthday party, and gratefully accepted the crumbs of a brief gift drop-off visit. Not anymore. Monday morning, James called to let me know the revised will was ready for my signature. I made an appointment for Wednesday, giving myself one more day to be absolutely certain of my decision. But as I hung up the phone, I knew there would be no last-minute change of heart. For the first time in decades, I was choosing myself. My needs, my happiness, my future. It wasn't selfish, it was necessary. That evening, as I prepared for my first watercolor class, arranging new brushes and paints in a carrying case, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw David shifting uncomfortably on my front step. I opened the door, unsurprised by his visit, yet unprepared for the surge of emotion that came with seeing him, love and hurt tangled together like roots. "Mom," he said, looking relieved when I appeared. "You haven't been answering your phone." "I've been busy," I replied, not inviting him in. He blinked, taking in my coat and the art supplies visible in the entryway. "You're going out?" "I have a class," I said simply. "A class?" He looked genuinely confused. "What kind of class?" "Watercolor painting." "Since when do you paint?" "Since today." I checked my watch. "And I need to leave in 5 minutes to be on time." David's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Mom, is everything okay? You're acting different." I almost laughed. "Different?" Yes, I supposed I was, different from the endlessly accommodating mother he'd taken for granted for years. "I'm fine, David. Better than I've been in a long time, actually." He frowned. "If this is about what Catherine said at dinner—" "It's not just about dinner," I interrupted gently. "It's about years of being slowly pushed aside until I'm barely a footnote in your lives. But that's okay. I understand now that things have changed, and I'm changing too." David's face flushed. "That's not fair. We include you when it's convenient," I finished for him. "And now I need to go to my class. We can talk another time." I stepped outside, closing and locking the door behind me. David stood frozen, on the porch, looking as though I'd slapped him. "Mom, wait." "Goodbye, David," I said, walking to my car without looking back. In the rearview mirror, I watched him standing there, bewildered by this mother he no longer recognized. Good, I thought. Starting the engine? It was about time he saw me clearly. My watercolor class became the highlight of my week. Helen was a patient teacher, and I discovered I had an eye for composition. A natural talent, she called it. The simple act of putting brush to paper brought me peace I hadn't felt in years. Our small class formed an unlikely friendship. Eleanor, a retired librarian who had also lost her husband. Martin, a former accountant who painted with meticulous precision. And me, finding my way through color and line. We often stayed for coffee after class, sharing stories and laughter. "My daughter thinks I'm having a midlife crisis," Eleanor confided one evening. "She keeps asking if I'm all right whenever I try something new." My son looked at me like I'd grown a second head when I mentioned painting, I admitted. Martin chuckled. "My kids sent me brochures for a retirement community when I bought a motorcycle last year. I'm 72, not dead." We laughed, united by the peculiar solidarity of parents whose children expected them to fade into the background. Convenient when needed, invisible when not. 2 weeks passed without a word from David. I knew he was waiting for me to make the first move, to smooth things over as I always had. But this time, I let the silence stretch between us. Wednesday afternoon, I signed the new will in James's office. It was strange, signing away the last tangible connection to my son and his family. Yet as I watched James affix his notary seal to the document, I felt only certainty. This doesn't have to be permanent, James reminded me. I know, I said. But for now, this is right. My calendar, once arranged around David's family, now filled with commitments of my own choosing. Watercolor classes on Tuesdays, book club every other Friday, volunteer work at the community center twice a week, morning walks with Nancy on Saturdays. The following Tuesday, I was arranging my paints when the gallery door jingled. I looked up to see James Hoffman entering, his expression grave. "Martha," he said, "I thought I might find you here. Could we speak privately?" Helen offered her office and James closed the door behind us. I ran into David at the Chamber of Commerce lunch. "Today," he began, my stomach tightened. "And?" "We were talking about estate planning, and I mentioned you'd recently updated your documents." James sighed. David looked surprised, then concerned. He asked if you were all right. "What did you say?" "That you were in excellent health as far as I knew." "But Martha," he hesitated. "Catherine was there too." After I spoke with David, I overheard her talking to her father about making sure they secured their position before you did anything drastic with your estate. A cold feeling spread through my chest. "I see. I thought you should know." James squeezed my shoulder. "I never meant to complicate things. It's not your fault," I assured him. "This was bound to happen eventually." That evening, there was a message from David on my machine. "Mom, call me back as soon as you get this. It's important." I didn't call. When the phone rang again, I let it go to the machine. "Mom, it's David again. Please call me, we're worried about you." I smiled wryly. They hadn't worried when they excluded me from family events or when weeks passed without checking on me. But now that they suspected changes to my will, suddenly they were concerned. The doorbell rang just after 8 p.m. David and Catherine stood on my front step, her face arranged in what she probably thought was a concerned expression. "Mom!" David's relief was evident. "We've been trying to reach you all day." "I've been busy," I said simply. "We were worried," Catherine added, her voice honey-sweet. "May we come in?" I stepped aside. Catherine glanced around, taking in the watercolor paintings now hanging on my walls, the stack of library books, the volunteer schedule pinned to my bulletin board. "You've been redecorating?" she asked. "Living," I corrected. "Would you like some tea?" "No, thank you," David said. "Mom, James Hoffman mentioned you'd been to see him about your estate plans." And there it was, the real reason for their sudden concern. "Yes, I updated my will," I confirmed. "Is that why you're here?" David shifted uncomfortably. "We're here because we care about you. You've been acting different lately." "You mean I've been living my own life?" I kept my voice mild. Catherine leaned forward. "Martha, these sudden changes, it's not like you. Actually, Catherine, you don't know what's like me anymore. You made that clear when you decided I wasn't fit to be seen at family functions." Catherine flinched. "That was a misunderstanding." "No, it wasn't," I interrupted. "It was perfectly clear, and it made me realize something important." I looked directly at my son. "David, for years I've centered my life around your family. I've been available whenever you needed childcare, help, or money. I've accepted cancellations, exclusions, and insults." "Mom, that's not fair," David began. "Let me finish," I said firmly. "I did all that because I thought that's what family does, sacrifices for each other. But I've realized that in our family, I'm the only one sacrificing, and that ends now." Catherine's smile froze. "What exactly does that mean, Martha?" "It means I'm no longer available at a moment's notice. It means I have my own life, my own friends, my own priorities. And yes, it means I've changed my will." David paled. "Changed it how?" "That's between me and my attorney." "But we're your family," Catherine protested, her composure slipping. "Surely you'd want to provide for your son, your grandchildren, the way you've provided for me?" I asked quietly. "By pushing me to the margins of your lives?" David looked stricken. "Mom, we never meant— Intentions don't matter, David. Actions do." I stood up. "It's getting late, and I have an early start tomorrow." "Wait," Catherine said, her voice sharper now. "You can't just drop this on us and expect us to leave. When you're ready to have a conversation that isn't motivated by concern for your inheritance, I'll be here. But not tonight. They left reluctantly. David looking shell-shocked, Catherine's face tight with barely contained anger. As their car pulled away, I felt no triumph, only sadness for what our relationship had become. The phone rang again within 20 minutes. I let the machine pick up, Catherine's voice filling my kitchen. Martha, this conversation isn't over. You're clearly not thinking clearly, and we're concerned about your judgment. David's father would be appalled by your behavior. I laughed. At that, a genuine, spontaneous laugh. Richard would have been my strongest supporter in this. He'd always seen through Catherine, warning me years ago that she viewed me as competition rather than family. I silenced the ringer and went to bed, knowing the next few days would bring more confrontations. But for the first time in years, I wasn't dreading conflict. I was ready for it. What I wasn't prepared for was how quickly Catherine would escalate things, or how completely she had underestimated me. 3 days after David and Catherine's visit, I received a letter from Dr. Lawrence Chen, a geriatric specialist I'd never heard of. He was reaching out because my family had expressed concerns about my cognitive health and had scheduled an evaluation. My hands trembled with anger. This was Catherine's doing, attempting to declare me incompetent to challenge my will. Called James immediately. They can't force you to undergo any evaluation, he assured me. But Martha, this suggests Catherine is willing to go to extreme lengths. What should I do? Document everything. And see your own doctor for a cognitive assessment that shows you're competent. I made an appointment with Dr. Powell, my physician for 20 years. She was outraged when I explained the situation. This is elder abuse, Martha, she said bluntly. Your cognitive function is excellent, by the way. She provided detailed documentation, which I forwarded to James. Armed with this protection, I felt ready to confront Catherine's schemes. Saturday morning, Nancy and I were returning from our walk when I spotted David's car in my driveway. He was sitting on my front steps. Want me to stay? Nancy asked, eyeing him suspiciously. No, I'll be fine, I assured her. David stood as I approached. Mom, we need to talk. About the dementia specialist Catherine tried to force on me? I asked coolly. Or about something else? He winced. Can we go inside? In my kitchen, David sat heavily while I made coffee, more for something to do with my hands than because either of us wanted it. Catherine went too far, he admitted. I told her so. Did you? I set a mug in front of him. Before or after you let her schedule a dementia evaluation without my consent? I didn't know about that until after, he said. She told me you were showing signs of confusion. And you believed her. It wasn't a question. I didn't know what to believe. You've been acting so differently. Because I've finally started living for myself, I said. That's not confusion, David. That's clarity. He stared into his coffee. I spoke to James yesterday. He explained some things. What things? That Catherine called him about your will, that you've been financially supporting us far more than I realized. He looked up. He said you paid for half our house. I nodded. The down payment. Why didn't you tell me? You never asked. And Catherine convinced you it was a loan from her father. David's face flushed. She said her dad was helping us, so we wouldn't have to rely on you. And you believed that too. He looked away. I've believed a lot of things. Catherine has always been convincing. That's one word for it, David sighed. I know I've been blind. But this situation with the doctor crossed a line. We argued about it all night. I studied my son. Why are you here, David? To apologize, he said quietly. And to ask you to come to dinner tomorrow night. Just you, me, and the kids. No Catherine. Where will she be? At her sister's. She doesn't know I'm here. He hesitated. Mom, I need to understand what's happened to our family. I considered his request. Part of me wanted to refuse, to protect myself from more hurt. But another part, the part that remembered rocking him to sleep, couldn't turn him away. All right, I said. But I have one condition. This needs to be an honest conversation. No more pretending. No more pretending, he agreed. The next evening, I drove to David's house with mixed emotions. The children greeted me with more enthusiasm than I'd seen in years. Emily hugging me tightly, Jake showing me his science project. It was as if a barrier had been lifted. During dinner, we talked about normal things: school, baseball, art classes. I told them about my watercolor painting, and Emily immediately asked to see my work. After the kids went upstairs, David and I sat in the living room with tea. "I've been looking at our finances," he said. "I had no idea how much you've contributed over the years. The house, school tuition, even that vacation to Disney World. You didn't look at the bank statements?" He shook his head. "Catherine handles all that. And now? Now I'm handling it," he said firmly. "I opened my own account yesterday." I raised an eyebrow. "Catherine can't be happy about that." "She isn't." His expression was grim. "But it's necessary. Mom, I've been thinking about what you said, about being the only one making sacrifices. You were right. It took you long enough to see it," I said, but without heat. "I know." He hesitated. "There's something else. Catherine's been intercepting your calls and cards to the kids. They thought you were ignoring them." The pain of this revelation was sharp. "Why would she do that?" "She said she was protecting them from your negativity." He shook his head. "I believed her when she said you were choosing to distance yourself. And now? Now I'm seeing clearly for the first time in years." He met my gaze. "I won't ask what's in your will, Mom. That's your business. But I want you to know that I'm making changes too." We talked for hours, peeling back layers of misunderstandings. David revealed more of Catherine's schemes, how she'd convinced him I was jealous of their success, that I was trying to control their lives. "She's always been afraid of losing her position," he explained. "When her parents divorced, her mother got nothing. She's terrified of ending up the same way." "That explains her behavior, but it doesn't excuse it," I said. "No, it doesn't." David sighed. "I don't know what happens next, Mom, but I know I don't want to lose you." As I drove home, I felt cautiously hopeful. David was finally seeing the truth, but years of manipulation wouldn't be undone in one evening, and Catherine wouldn't surrender her control easily. I was right. The next morning, my doorbell rang at 7 a.m. Catherine stood on my porch, her face a mask of cold fury. "How dare you?" she hissed. "Coming into my home, turning my husband and children against me." "Good morning, Catherine," I said calmly. "Would you like to come in?" She pushed past me. "You think you've won? That David will choose you over me?" "This isn't a competition," I said. "It never was, except in your mind." "Do you think I don't know what you're doing?" She paced. "Using your money to buy their affection, playing the victim? Is that what you've been doing, Catherine? Projecting your tactics onto me?" She whirled to face me. "You have no idea what it took to build this life, and I won't let you destroy it with your pathetic neediness. The perfect family doesn't exclude its members or manipulate and lie." "Everyone lies," she snapped. "Everyone manipulates. That's how the world works." I studied her, seeing the frightened woman beneath the polished exterior. "I'm sorry for whatever made you believe that, Catherine, but it's not true." Something flickered in her eyes, uncertainty perhaps quickly suppressed. "David will come to his senses," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I've never left, Catherine. You pushed me out." I moved to the door. "Now I think it's time for you to go." She paused. "This isn't over." "No," I agreed, "but it's changing." After she left, I called David to warn him. He sounded resigned but determined. "I'm staying at Mark's place for a few days," he told me. "Catherine and I need some space." That evening, as I painted, I received a text from Emily. "Grandma, can Jake and I come over tomorrow? Dad says it's okay." For the first time in years, I felt like a grandmother again. Not just a convenient babysitter, but someone my grandchildren wanted to see. Whatever happened between David and Catherine, at least that bond was being restored. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. David moved to his friend's apartment but brought Emily and Jake to visit regularly. They seemed unbothered by Catherine's absence. "Dad's happier now," Emily said during our painting session. Our relationship bloomed through cooking, games, and conversations. Truths emerged gradually. "Mom said you didn't care about us," Jake said while playing chess. "I've always cared about you both," I assured him. James called about Catherine's lawyer inquiring about my will. "So it was about money all along," I sighed. "For her, maybe." David seems genuinely sorry. That evening, David visited. "I'm filing for divorce," he said quietly. "I can't pretend anymore. I'm sorry. I'm sorry," I said, squeezing his hand. "I should have seen how she isolated you years ago." Catherine requested a meeting at a cafe. "I want to apologize," she said, her usual confidence gone. "Why now?" I asked. "Therapy. I watched my mother lose everything in divorce. I was terrified of being vulnerable." "So you made everyone else vulnerable," she nodded. "I was wrong." She later gave me a box of intercepted cards I'd sent the children. "I can't undo what I did," she admitted. 2 months later, David and Catherine remained separated but in counseling. The walls between my family and me had fallen. James called about my will. I decided to create educational trusts for Emily and Jake, with the rest going to Hope Harbor. "Nothing for David?" James asked. "He needs my trust, not my money." Spring arrived, and I hosted a gathering with my painting friends, Nancy and my family. Watching them interact, I felt whole again. "Happy, Mom?" David asked. Looking at this blend of my worlds, my birth family and the one I'd created, I smiled. "Yes," I answered truthfully. "I'm happy. I had lost and found my family, but more importantly, I had found myself." The journey taught me that sometimes letting go is the first step toward healing. What began with rejection ended with rediscovering joy.